Hello and welcome to this week's PR Week video podcast, and this week we're going to look at the way PR agencies can manage new business. Stuart Pocock is from the Observatory and he's in the studio. Stuart, thanks for joining us. First of all, how successful are agencies at making new business?
I have to say that in comparison with other agencies in the sort of marketing communications industry, not great. PR, I'm afraid, doesn't really hack it as well as a lot of other agencies. I think the principal problems are several-fold. First and foremost, a lot of work that they do is project work. So work tends to come in and you do the project and it goes out of the back door. So there's always a desire to keep that pipeline filled. But I think one of the big problems is that if you're doing work really well on a project basis, you're going to actually get more projects from those clients. So you should focus quite a lot of your attention, I think, on your existing business. But secondly, very few PR agencies have dedicated new business functions. Very often what you're doing is you're dealing with the chief exec or the MD or whatever, which in theory is good news because you're getting direct access to somebody very senior in the agency if you're coming in as a client with that first inquiry. But the reality is that very often that individual is pretty heavily ring-fenced by either his receptionist or his PA. And I mean, we've had situations in the past where you're trying to talk to the PA about a new business opportunity, and somehow she's got a phone which is translating this into a message about me trying to sell them a flatbed copier, and you just literally get parked. We've actually had a situation in the past where we've been talking about a big international prospect to a client, and the PA said, "No, I'm sorry, we're not interested in that sort of thing." Now, if the MD actually found out about it, it would be a nightmare. So the problem being is that agencies don't have dedicated new business functions, and that would help them an awful lot, I believe.
Well, you've mentioned quite a few of the common mistakes there. Would you say there are 3 top tips to enable this to happen more successfully for businesses?
I think you need to get a new business person in place. That's difficult, I accept, dependent on size of agency. But if you don't actually employ a new business director, then you should have somebody internally in the building who is that person who is responsible for new business, and it's communicated around the agency that is the individual who looks after it. So when a call comes in and you speak to the receptionist, she knows that call needs to go to that particular individual, or if the call actually gets put through to somebody else, they get that person to ring back. Because as it is at the moment, it'll just get parked. You say, "I'll try and get somebody to call you back," then it gets forgotten about, and it doesn't happen. And this really happens at a frighteningly large amount within the PR category, not in other industries such as creative agencies or integrated agencies, etc.
This term, the pitch process, is often used. Where do you think businesses fall down when using that?
I think from the it's sort of in the DNA of anybody who works in marketing communications. When a phone rings and there's an opportunity to do some new business, everybody's very excited about it and nobody can ever say no. I think probably the PR industry is a bit worse than other industries in that they will actually very often take on board the opportunity to do a new business pitch without really researching the viability of it. Very often we know for a fact, not I think if clients are working through consultants such as ourselves, but we know for a fact that very often a client, and it won't be the marketing director that'll be running the pitch, it'll be somebody a bit further down the food chain who maybe has never done a pitch before, and they will contact 10, 12, 15 agencies, sometimes just send a written brief out, never having even met the agencies, and expect the agencies to respond in next to no time with a pitch, in a week's time. And I think it's inherent upon the agency to understand what the nature of the pitch is, what the odds are, how many people are actually going into the pitch process with them, what the budget levels are, what the scopes of work are, etc., etc. And actually just doing that will pretty quickly hone down whether the client is doing this properly or in fact they're not.
Because it's so important, that pitch process. How do you enable yourselves and your company, more importantly, to stand out from the crowd? How do you stand out from the other companies that are doing exactly the same as you?
Well, I think that pitch theatre is something which can work, but pitch theatre needs to be managed very, very carefully. I mean, we've seen examples in the past where things are staged to sort of excite clients and actually fall completely on stony ground, because unless you're very good at doing it, it's not going to work. But on the other hand, I do remember a pitch that we did actually for a marketing consultancy company, where the agency who actually pitched for it actually didn't use any PowerPoint, didn't use any charts, as they discussed the proposals to the clients, they were literally writing them up on a whiteboard. And this was actually a really clever piece of pitch technique, because marketing consultants, when they're working with their clients, guess what? They don't use charts, they put stuff up on whiteboard. So actually very clever. I mean, the reality is it was all massively well rehearsed, because at the end of the presentation we were all given a document, and goodness me, what a surprise, what was in the document with what's been written on the wall. But it worked really well, and it made the client feel very at home in that environment. Just before you go, Stuart, in terms of going back to the initial subject of building new business and building new business contacts, what would your final piece of advice be to anybody? I think you've got to be pretty rigorous about a new business program. I think there is a tendency, and a lot of this is slightly sweeping statement, but there is a tendency in the industry for people to wait for the phone to ring and it's coming by word of mouth and so on and so forth. And that'll happen, and agencies will get business via that, and that's great news. But you need a logical, coordinated business plan which somebody is in control of and is actually running pretty tightly. So that's a combination of sort of mailings, attending events, networking, etc, etc, etc. But it needs to be coordinated, and I think all too often it isn't. Stuart, thanks for your time. Very well. Stuart Pocock from the Observatory. That's all for this week's PR Week video podcast. We'll see you next week.